The forest is awake. What time is it where you are? And from where do you listen? Subscribe and hear what hides in the dark. We arrived at our campsite near Idaho City just as the sun was setting, the sky turning a deep orange and pink. The forest around us was dark and quiet, the trees standing tall like silent giants. My boyfriend and I were excited to be here, ready for a weekend of camping, exploring, and maybe even a little ghost hunting. He had told me about an old cemetery nearby, and we thought it might be fun to check it out the next day. The campsite seemed perfect at first, quiet, secluded, surrounded by trees that swayed gently in the wind. We set up our tent, got a fire going, and started to relax. I played some music on my phone while we roasted marshmallows, and my boyfriend told me stories about the history of Idaho City. But something felt strange. As he talked, it felt like the fire was getting louder, like the crackling was almost drowning out his voice. I tried to ignore it, but a weird feeling settled in my stomach. After a while I looked at my phone and noticed the battery was at 30%. A few minutes later, it just died. No warning. Nothing. I was confused. It shouldn't have died that fast. We decided to go sit in the car to charge it for a bit. My boyfriend said he'd go check on the fire while I stayed in the car, waiting for my phone to come back to life. Suddenly, the passenger door slammed shut. It wasn't just a gentle close. It slammed so hard the whole car shook. I jumped, my heart pounding. I quickly turned on the car's headlights, the bright beams cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing there. Just the trees, their shadows dancing in the light. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Maybe it was just the wind. When my boyfriend came back, he said the same thing. It's probably just the wind, he told me. But I could see he was a little shaken too. We decided to call it a night. The wind had picked up, making strange whispery noises as it moved through the trees. We finished our drinks, put out the fire, and crawled into our tent. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The wind kept brushing against the tent, making the rain flap rustle in a way that sounded almost deliberate. I lay there, staring up at the dark ceiling of the tent, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I kept hearing faint noises, like whispers carried on the wind, too quiet to understand, but just loud enough to know they were there. I tried to tell myself it was just the forest, just the wind playing tricks on me. But as I lay there, eyes wide open in the darkness, I couldn't help but feel that we weren't alone. Something was out there, just beyond the trees, waiting. And whatever it was, it had noticed us. I woke up to my boyfriend shaking my shoulder, his face pale in the dim light of the early morning. "Listen," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I held my breath, straining my ears. There it was. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching over the dry leaves just outside our tent. My heart skipped a beat. The steps were moving around us, circling the tent. I looked at my boyfriend, and he was staring at the ceiling, eyes wide with fear. He pressed a finger to his lips, motioning for me to stay quiet. The footsteps moved closer, and I could hear them clearly now. Slow, heavy, like someone was deliberately taking each step. My mind raced. Who could be out here? We hadn't seen anyone for miles. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my whole body tense. Suddenly I heard a faint metallic sound, like something scraping against our car. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too human. I reached for my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight, but the battery was still dead. Panic was creeping in, and I felt my hands shaking. I looked at my boyfriend, and he nodded towards the car. I knew what he was thinking. We had to scare whatever it was away. I reached over, my hand trembling as I pressed the button on the car key to activate the alarm. The silence of the forest shattered as the car horn blared, the lights flashing. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and for a moment, everything was still. I held my breath, waiting. The alarm stopped, and the silence returned. I listened, straining my ears, but there was nothing. Just the wind rustling through the trees. I looked at my boyfriend, and he gave me a small shaky smile. Maybe it's gone, he whispered, his voice barely audible, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Something was still out there. Minutes passed, and just as I started to relax, the footsteps returned. This time, they were closer, moving slowly around the tent, just inches from where we lay. My boyfriend's body went stiff, and I could see the fear in his eyes. I felt my heart pounding, each beat echoing in my ears. The footsteps moved around the tent, circling us, then stopped right where our heads were. I heard a whisper, soft, almost like it was carried on the wind, but clear enough that I knew it wasn't my imagination. My boyfriend grabbed my hand, his grip tight. We had to get out of there. Slowly we started packing up our things, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Every rustle of fabric seemed deafening, and I was terrified that whatever was outside would hear us. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely zip my bag. Finally, we were ready. My boyfriend nodded at me, and we both took a deep breath. He unzipped the tent slowly, the sound almost unbearable in the silence. The moment the flap opened, I felt it. A heavy, suffocating feeling, like the air had thickened. A sour smell hit me, making my stomach turn. I struggled to breathe, my chest tightening. My boyfriend squeezed my hand, and we stepped out into the darkness. The forest was still, the trees looming over us like silent watchers. I grabbed our bags and ran to the car, my eyes darting around, trying to see into the shadows. My boyfriend went to grab the rest of our supplies. Suddenly I heard his voice, calling my full name from the direction of the road. "Stephanie!" It was urgent, desperate, but something felt wrong. We never used our full names, always pet names. I stood there, frozen, staring into the darkness. The voice called again, and I felt my blood run cold. Then out of nowhere, my boyfriend appeared beside me, his face pale. "What are you looking at?" he asked, his voice shaky. I turned to him, my heart pounding. "Did you call me?" I asked, but he shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. He hadn't called me. We didn't wait any longer. We grabbed everything we could, threw it into the car, and got out of there as fast as we could. The feeling of being watched didn't leave. Even as we sped down the winding road, the forest pressing in on us from all sides. Whatever was out there, it wasn't finished with us. And I knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before it found us again. We drove away from the campsite as fast as we could, the tires kicking up gravel as we sped down the narrow road. The trees felt like they were closing in on us, their branches reaching out like dark, twisted hands. My boyfriend was gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, and I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something chasing us. The air in the car was thick, the same sour smell from the campsite still lingering, making my stomach churn. We hadn't been driving for more than 10 minutes when it happened. Out of nowhere, a deer jumped into the road, its eyes glowing a strange bright yellow in the headlights. My boyfriend slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just inches away from it. The deer just stood there, staring at us, its matted fur hanging off its body in patches. Something about it felt wrong, its eyes didn't look natural, and it didn't move, even as we honked the horn. "Go around it," I whispered, my voice trembling. My boyfriend nodded, slowly steering the car around the deer. As we passed it, I couldn't help but stare at it. Its head turned to follow us, its glowing eyes locked onto mine. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. We kept driving, trying to put as much distance between us and that campsite as possible. But then, just as we rounded a bend in the road, there it was again. The same deer, standing in the middle of the road, its head twisted at an unnatural angle. My boyfriend cursed under his breath, swerving to avoid it. My hands were shaking, and I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. It didn't make sense. How could it be the same deer? We had just passed it. We kept driving, but it happened again, and again. Each time we saw it, the deer looked more twisted, more wrong. Its eyes seemed to glow brighter, and its body looked like it was falling apart. My boyfriend's face was pale, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but I knew he was just as scared as I was. After the fourth time, I couldn't take it anymore. "Don't stop," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Just keep going." My boyfriend nodded, his foot pressing down harder on the gas pedal. The road seemed endless, the trees pressing in on us from all sides. The air in the car felt heavy, like we were being suffocated by the darkness around us. Finally, we saw the lights of a small town in the distance. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The feeling of being watched slowly started to fade, but the fear was still there, lingering in the back of my mind. We made it home in record time, neither of us saying a word the rest of the drive. But even as we stepped into our house, the sense of dread didn't leave. The shadows seemed darker, and the air felt colder. I knew, deep down, that whatever we had encountered in those woods wasn't done with us. It had followed us, and it was only a matter of time before it made itself known again. I always loved stories about monsters, things like the Wendigo, the Rake, and Skinwalkers. There was something exciting about myths that made my skin crawl. So when my parents finally said I could camp alone in the nearby forest, I was thrilled. I thought it would be a peaceful adventure under the stars. I had my tent, a campfire, my camping chair, and even some trail cameras to catch pictures of deer. Everything seemed perfect, just me and the forest. As night fell, the clearing where I had set up camp got really dark. The only light came from the campfire, flickering and casting shadows that danced across the tall trees. I sat there listening to music on my phone, staring at the flames. The forest around me was so quiet, so still. It was almost too quiet. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A growl. Not just any growl, though. It was like nothing I'd ever heard. It was deep, like a bear's rumble, but there was this strange gurgling and cracking sound mixed in. It felt wrong, like something that shouldn't exist. My heart started pounding, and I grabbed my lantern, shining it around the campsite. My voice was shaky as I shouted, "Hey!" hoping it was just a fox or some other animal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I felt a chill run down my spine as the growl faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I swung the lantern around, the light cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw it. A shape in the shadows. A hand, long and thin, with sharp gray claws. My breath caught in my throat as more of it came into view. It had a head, gray and hairless, with no nose and eyes that glowed red. Its grin was too wide, filled with jagged teeth that looked like they could tear me apart. The creature stared at me, and I felt frozen in place. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. And just like that, it disappeared behind a tree. I blinked, not sure if I'd really seen it or if my imagination was playing tricks on me. But then, the silence was shattered by a scream, a high-pitched, ear-piercing screech that seemed to come from everywhere at once. My heart leaped into my throat, and before I knew it, the creature was back, charging straight at me. Its mouth was wide open, its jaw unhinged like it was ready to swallow me whole. I turned and ran. My feet pounded against the dirt, and I could hear the creature behind me, its heavy footsteps, and that awful gurgling growl. The branches of the trees scratched at my face and arms as I stumbled through the forest, barely able to see where I was going. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain across my back, a burning, stinging feeling that made me gasp. It had slashed me. I kept running, my mind racing, my chest aching. I could hear it getting closer, feel its presence right behind me. I had to do something. I stopped suddenly and ducked, just as the creature lunged at me. I heard it crash into the ground, and I took off in the other direction, my legs shaking but somehow keeping me moving. I didn't know where I was going, all I knew was that I had to get out of there. After what felt like forever, I finally burst out of the forest. I stumbled into someone's backyard, my lungs burning, my face pale. A family was having a cookout, and they all turned to look at me, their eyes wide. I must have looked like a mess, with my torn clothes and the scratch on my back. I collapsed to the ground, barely able to catch my breath. The last thing I remember before everything went black was their worried faces and someone yelling for help. I had escaped, but I knew deep down that it wasn't over. That creature, whatever it was still out there. And I had a feeling it wasn't going to give up that easily. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a couch in a stranger's living room. The first thing I noticed was the warmth, something that was completely missing in the forest. My body ached all over, and my back stung like it was on fire. I could hear voices low and worried coming from the kitchen. Slowly I sat up, wincing at the pain. I tried to piece together what had happened. The forest, the creature, the chase. My heart started racing again just thinking about it. The family who found me must have heard me moving because they hurried into the room. There were 3 of them, a man, a woman, and a teenage girl. They all looked worried, but there was something else in their eyes too. Fear. The kind of fear that made me uneasy. The man spoke first, his voice calm but serious. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "We've seen things in those woods, but nothing like what you described." I told them everything I could remember. The growl, the glowing red eyes, the way the creature chased me. The more I talked, the more nervous they looked. The teenage girl, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up. "We call it the peaker," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been around for as long as anyone can remember. It doesn't usually let people get away." My stomach turned at her words. "The peaker?" I repeated, my voice shaky. The woman nodded, her eyes darting to the window, as if she expected to see it staring back at her. "It watches," she said. "It waits. And once it marks someone..." Her voice trailed off and I felt a chill run through me. I didn't want to know what happened once it marked someone, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. The man cleared his throat, his face grim. "We think you should stay here for the night," he said. "You're not safe out there, not now." I wanted to argue, to say that I'd be fine, but the fear in their eyes stopped me. They knew more about this creature than I did, and if they were scared, then I had every reason to be terrified. That night, I stayed on their couch, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made my heart race. I kept picturing those glowing red eyes, that awful grin. The peaker was still out there, and it wasn't going to forget about me. I knew it would be back. The only question was when. The family tried to reassure me, but I could tell they were scared too. They kept the lights on all night, and every so often, I'd see one of them peek out the window, just to make sure. The fear was real, and it hung heavy in the air. I knew that escaping the forest was only the beginning. The peaker had marked me, and somehow, I had to figure out how to survive whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up with a start. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for a moment, I almost believed everything that had happened was just a nightmare. But then I felt the sting on my back, and my heart sank. It was real. The peaker was real. I sat up slowly, my muscles aching from the night before. The family was already awake, moving quietly around the kitchen, their eyes tired. They were scared, I could tell. And I was scared too. The man, who I learned was named Mr. Harris, handed me a plate of food. "You need to keep your strength up," he said, his voice gentle but firm. I nodded, but I could barely eat. My mind kept replaying everything that had happened. The growl, the chase, the creature's eyes staring at me. Every bite tasted like ash, and I had to force myself to swallow. Mrs. Harris came over and sat down across from me. She looked at me with kind but worried eyes. "We need to talk about what happens next," she said. "The peaker doesn't just go away. Once it's marked you, it will come back. It might take days, weeks, even months, but it will come." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and I could feel my hands start to tremble. I didn't want to believe her, but deep down, I knew she was right. I asked them what I should do, how I could protect myself. The truth was, they didn't have all the answers. "We've heard stories," Mr. Harris said. "Some say it hates fire, others say it can't cross running water, but no one really knows for sure. He paused, his eyes darkening. What we do know is that it will try to find you. You can't let your guard down. The fear in the room was suffocating. I felt like I was drowning in it. I had escaped the forest, but I hadn't escaped the creature. It was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. I knew I couldn't stay with the Harris family forever. I didn't want to put them in danger any longer than I already had. But the thought of going home, of being alone again, terrified me. What if it came for me when I was by myself? What if I didn't make it out alive the next time? The teenage girl, Emily, spoke up. "We'll help you as much as we can," she said, her voice determined. "You're not alone in this." Her words gave me a small flicker of hope, but it was fragile like a candle flame in a storm. I thanked them, but I knew this was something I'd have to face on my own eventually. I couldn't hide forever. That day, I left the Harris house with a heavy heart. They gave me supplies, food, water, even a small knife. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little better. As I walked away from their house, I felt the weight of the forest behind me, like a dark shadow looming over everything. I glanced back at the tree line, half expecting to see those red eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing, only the silent, endless trees. I knew the peaker was still out there somewhere. It wouldn't forget about me, and I wouldn't forget about it either. The scar on my back was a constant reminder that I had been marked, and that it was only a matter of time before it came for me again. The fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. A reminder that some things, some monsters, are very real, and sometimes they don't let go. Hello, I refuse to release my name as I'd rather be left alone to grieve my loss. So I'll refer to myself as K. I'm sorry if this is a mess. I'm still dealing with the loss, and grief, and suffering from my diagnosis of depression and PTSD, caused by what happened last year. To start off, I'm from a big city in the UK. I grew up fighting and testing my parents' limits, as any young boy should, in fact, not do. Due to how I grew up, I believed that I had become resilient enough to never, ever back down from anyone or anything. Even when I was beaten to a pulp, I wouldn't stop trying to stand, as in my young, stupid head, the fight wasn't over until I won or passed out. As time passed, I soon realized that school and education were not on my to-do list, and due to that, my parents were always disappointed. But I never truly cared about their opinions. Within a couple of weeks I would be kicked out or banned from attending lessons, so I'd just go to the gym and train. When I left school, I was angry and focused on doing anything that enabled me to fight, from boxing to fighting people in the streets over football matches, despite having a low interest in the sport. Eventually, this wasn't enough, and I realized I had to find something that would give me satisfaction and supply me with a paycheck. That's when I decided to join the British Army. I began my training at Catterick in 2018 as an infantryman. Despite everything, my parents loved the idea and were proud of me. During training, I got into a lot of trouble for fighting and getting into drama, but somehow managed to pass out as a fully qualified soldier. I spent a couple of years doing the same things I had done in training: ranges, training exercises, and PT, physical training. I hated it, and it fueled my aggression. It got to the point that I was on a commanding officer's final warning order and was facing paperwork that would make me a civilian again. But all that stopped when I met Jessica. I was in a club when I met Jessica at the bar, waiting to order. She was 5'7", with blonde hair and a ridiculously beautiful face. She was every young boy's dream girl, and I wanted her. Within seconds, we were talking, and she laughed at my awful jokes. We just clicked. She was from America, and just visiting the UK with her friends. Fast forwarding to December 2022. Jess and I were in a relationship. It was perfect. She calmed me down to the point where I was rarely angry and was doing well at work. The only downside was the distance. With her living in America, I never saw her much. However, in January last year, I got permission from my company sergeant major to take leave for 2 weeks to visit her and her family at their home in America. After a long flight and an Uber, I finally had her in my arms. She introduced me to her father, a tough-looking man who himself had served years before in the military. He had the typical jarhead look you stereotype from the movies. I was a little nervous, but he set my nerves at ease when he shook my hand and expressed his love for me and his daughter's relationship, saying that he saw me as part of his family. Later that day, we sat in their backyard, drinking, eating, and talking about our pasts. Her father asked if I would like to join them on a hunting trip to their own private hunting ground, which had been a family tradition dating back generations. I agreed. The next day we set off in his truck and drove for a few hours until we reached a dense woodland they called Archer's Pass. Once we had dismounted and grabbed our gear, we set off across the trail. We hiked for a couple of hours before taking a rest. It was beginning to get dark, and Jessica's dad said, "We should set up camp and finish the hike at sunrise. That way, we should reach our private spot, and we'll end up deep enough that we won't be disturbed." We all agreed and set up a fire and the tents. Jess asked if I would share a tent with her, and I looked at her father, waiting for a sign of disapproval, but he just chuckled and said, "Don't look at me." So I agreed, and we set up her tent. Afterward, we cooked up some chicken wings and burgers, sang folk songs, danced and laughed. It was close to 11 p.m., so Jess and I decided to turn in. We snuggled up together, and I fell asleep almost instantly. In the morning, after breakfast and collapsing the camp, we set off again. Despite it being sunrise, the trees blocked out the sun like a wall, allowing darkness to engulf the woodland. I'm embarrassed to admit the number of branches I walked into, much to Jessica's amusement. Within an hour, we had made it close to the hunting spot. That's when it all started. As we were walking through the brush, we came to a fallen tree that we would have to walk around. As I reached the tree, a scream made me stop in my tracks. The scream was human. It took a few seconds for me to realize that it was a woman's scream. "Help! Someone please help me! Oh God, please!" Each individual scream and shout was separated by seconds of silence until, after the last call for help, there was an eerie silence. Then a horrifying screech, unlike anything I had ever heard in my life, followed. To describe it in words, it was like the roar of a lion mixed with the tone of a laughing hyena. Jessica's dad put his finger to his lips and motioned for us to get down. The screams had completely stopped since the screech had pierced the woodland. Eerie silence took root. Jess's dad looked around with his rifle, showing no reaction, telling me he saw nothing. He turned to us and told us to stay put while he went to check it out. He quickly turned his head to us and said, "If I'm not back in 5 minutes or if something goes wrong, get out of here and call for help. You won't get a signal here." Jess tried to protest, and he covered her mouth as a sound carried by the wind reached us. "Please help." It was similar to the voice of the screaming woman, but it wasn't the same. It sounded weak and a lot quieter, as if the person had been drained of the ability to scream again. But there was something else. A slight gurgling sound between the words, as if someone was trying to talk with their mouth filled with fluid, or as if someone were mimicking the words. In my mind, I thought she may have been choking on something. Despite trying to wave off the thought, it prevailed. Blood. Jess's dad told us to hide behind the fallen tree and stay out of sight no matter what happened, unless we needed to run for help. "Keep her safe," was all he said to me, before turning away and slowly walking through the brush towards where the screams had originated. Once his footsteps were out of earshot, there was nothing but silence. No birds, no natural sounds whatsoever. Around 5 minutes had passed without so much as a twig snapping. It was nerve-wracking. Jess looked worried. I put my arm around her and whispered, "Don't worry, everything will be..." Bang, 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 3 shots. A shot followed shortly by 2 more. A couple of seconds later we both stood up. Jess began to move towards where the shots had originated, but I pulled her back out of protectiveness. I knew something felt off and couldn't allow her to walk towards a possibly dangerous situation. I told her, "No, your dad can handle himself and I need to look after you." She screamed back, "An animal could have attacked him. He needs help." I thought for a second before telling her, "Okay, you run for the truck and wait until I'm back. I'm going to go get your dad." I took her rifle from her and loaded a round into its chamber. She hesitated in responding and shot me a look of disobedience. But I countered with, "If he's hurt or in trouble, I'm better trained to help him. And if something goes wrong, and I don't return within a reasonable time, then you'll have to call for help." I don't know who to call or what to say. I'm not even familiar with the area. You are. So you're going to be better suited to guiding a rescue. She quickly nodded before hugging me and quietly saying, "Please get him," before turning around and jogging away. I turned my back to hers and began walking towards her dad's last known location. My heart was beating rapidly, and I felt a wave of anxiety and fear hit me when, from behind I heard, "And be careful, please." I turned my head in the direction of her voice but saw only tree branches and shrubs. I turned back and began to jog towards the point we had parted ways with her father. Within a few seconds, I stood exactly where I was before. I looked down at the rifle I had slung. I knew from my training that the caliber would easily put anything I deemed dangerous out of commission. Everything I learned back home in battalion and basic training told me that. With a cocktail of confidence, fear, and anxiety, I began to walk towards the shrubs where Jess's dad had walked through. Visibility was terrible. I spent more time staring down while pushing tree branches away from my face than I did looking straight ahead, until I came to a small clearing. Nothing large, just enough for a family pool in a backyard. I examined my surroundings. Trees stood around the clearing like sentries. Thick shrubs filled the gaps, making a wall of green and brown that no light penetrated. That's when I soon realized that Jess's dad could have gone in any direction past this point. Worry began creeping up on me. I stepped out into the clearing, looking for any trace of him. I stumbled across small patches of flattened grass. They were in a pattern, and I realized they were recent footsteps. I traced them to the center of the clearing when I stopped. There, in front of me, were 2 footsteps by themselves, and to the right, more. However, they were more spaced out and in no particular pattern, other than the direction. Something shiny caught my eye below me. I knelt down and picked up a piece of ejected brass. I looked at it and began thinking about what had happened. I came to the conclusion that Jess's dad had walked into the clearing and fired the 3 rounds we heard before running away to my right, back into the darkness of the woods. I wondered what could have made him run, and if it was the same thing he fired at. Or perhaps he tried to run back to us but lost his sense of direction and went the wrong way. "Kay!" A masculine scream came from my right. I turned and stood, recognizing the voice of my girlfriend's father. "Kay, run! Get out now!" came from the tree line. It sounded loud and desperate, followed by a horrifying scream of pain. I raised my rifle, pulled the bolt slightly back. A round was chambered. I clicked the safety off, double-checked that the bolt was fully forward, and ran towards the tree line. Just before I reached it, the scream stopped, and so did I. I listened carefully. Not a single sound until I heard my name from behind me. I turned and saw nothing. Again, my name was called by a voice that I didn't recognize. Yet this time, I couldn't tell what direction it came from. I shouted for Jess's father and got nothing in return. I turned back to where I originally heard him and pushed past the branches and shrubs. As I passed the first tree, I saw blood splattered on the ground in front of me. My gaze followed the trail, which led to a blood-soaked rifle, with a hand and arm still gripping it. In that moment, I was stricken with shock. My eyes were locked on the rifle, my heart beat rapidly, and my breath was panicked and uncontrolled as if I had run miles. I couldn't move. Help me, pulled me out of my trance. My eyes darted in all directions, and I frantically turned around in circles, scanning my surroundings. "Kay, help," came from a tree just past the rifle. The voice was not one I knew. It was hollow and demonic, as if someone was pretending to be a talking zombie. My mind jumped to the thought of Jess's dad being injured. I ran forward to the tree and found nothing. "Kay," came from behind me towards the clearing. I began panicking and started shouting for him. "Kay, keep her safe, keep her safe," screamed through the woods before a horrid inhuman scream came from all around me. I ran back towards the clearing. pushing past branches and focusing on not losing my footing. My hands gripped my rifle tightly as I used it for momentum to push past any limit my body had. Just in front of me was the tree line leading to the opening. Just before reaching it, that same scream came from right behind me, before something crashed into me from behind, sending me flying through the tree line onto my face. I slowly and wearily pushed myself off the ground and turned over, looking at where I had come from. What I saw was something that can't be explained by any scientific or rational means. A mouth that housed rows of knife-like teeth, below a jaw covered in gray skin, littered with scars, with what looked like both dried and fresh drops of blood running down from the teeth. I instinctively grabbed the rifle, which was resting on my stomach due to the sling keeping it attached to me. Without hesitation, the rifle was raised and aimed, center of mass. Though I could only see this mouth, I knew roughly where its body would be. Part of me wanted to shoot at where I suspected the rest of the face would be. However, I knew my training wasn't useless, more surface area on the body rather than the head. I placed my finger on the trigger. However, as if something were whispering in my ear, an outside force told me that pulling the trigger back would be a mistake. I looked up from the scope, at a pair of now visible black holes I believed were its eyes, and shouted, "What the hell are you?" A smile crept across the creature's face before it spoke. Death. I fired. I fired 3 rounds, center of mass. I looked up from the scope and saw nothing. The face that had been less than 15 meters away was gone, which gave me more fear than relief. I got to my feet, and with my rifle raised, I slowly walked towards where I thought I'd find a corpse. I moved the branches of the trees and saw a black fluid on the leaves, but no body. As I realized the worst-case scenario was a reality, it wasn't dead. Another scream from the creature came from deeper in the woods, followed by the snapping of branches and heavy, spaced-apart footsteps. The sounds were all around me, as if it was running circles around the clearing, waiting for the opportunity to ambush and kill me. I blindly fired at points where I thought the creature would be, only to hear, "Kay, help me," followed by the scream. I realized that in this situation, I had no chance of survival. Panic set in. Slowly, I began to look around. I saw where I originally came from and started moving towards it in a sprint, adrenaline pumping and heart racing. I ran through shrubs, allowing the branches of trees to attack my body. I smashed my shoulder into a tree. Pain engulfed my shoulder, but I didn't care. I focused on survival, and adrenaline kept me running. Once I reached the overturned tree, I made contact with something solid. I felt it shift and shuffled away in panic before realizing it was Jess. She was holding her head and slowly sitting up. "Jesus, what's wrong with you?" she groaned. I quickly got back up, grabbed her arm and dragged her behind the log. I perched my rifle on it and began scanning my surroundings. Jess pulled on my arm. "Hey, what happened? Where's my dad? Kay, what are you looking for?" I placed my hand over her mouth and muttered, "There's something out there. It was chasing me, it tried to kill me, and it's still out there. We have to be quiet." "Of course." She looked at me with confusion, then anger. "Not funny," she snapped before standing up and beginning to walk in the direction I had come from. I ran around the log and grabbed her arm. "No, if you go that way you'll die. I'm not kid." I was interrupted by her father's voice. "Jess, where are you?" I quickly covered Jess's mouth and dragged her back behind the log. "Do you trust me?" I whispered to her. She studied my face for a while before nodding. "That isn't your dad, it's some sort of creature. I saw it. If we make any sound, it'll kill us both." Jess, where are you?" came from our left. It sounded like her father at first, but broke into a raspy voice. Seconds later, it was followed by the creature's screams. Jess went pale and whispered, "What the hell is that?" I didn't answer her as I scanned around. I still saw nothing, but I heard deep breathing and footsteps. Some were paired with the sound of breaking sticks, some weren't. It was getting closer. I knelt down to Jess. Her eyes were locked on mine. "When I say go, you run back to the car. Don't stop, no matter what you hear." I followed my order with a kiss on her forehead. It was ice cold. She looked up and nodded before handing me a magazine for the rifle. I stood up and once again scanned my surroundings before looking at her and whispering, go." She quickly turned and began running. Within moments, her figure was gone, hidden by the wall of branches and a mist of darkness. I turned back to keep an eye out for the creature. I released the magazine from the rifle. I estimated that I had only 1 or 2 rounds remaining, plus the magazine in my pocket. I listened carefully for anything, yet nothing. No screams or footsteps exposed the creature. It had gone back into stealth. I waited for a few minutes, but it was no use. Not a single sound pierced my ears until I heard Jess's scream from behind me. I believe the adrenaline induced a blackout because before I came to my senses, I was sprinting towards the scream. No matter how fast I ran, the scream was becoming quieter and quieter, as if it was outrunning me. I eventually stopped to catch my breath. Blood trickled from my head. I realized I must have cut it on a branch. The blood ran down into my eyes, making it harder to see. I wiped my head and began running again, hoping to hear another scream. However, none came. Once again, fear and anxiety flooded every one of my veins. I stopped, falling to my knees, my eyes flooded with tears. "I've lost her," escaped my lips. "Leave now or die here," came from behind me. I turned to find the creature towering over me, holding Jess by the back of her neck. She wasn't moving. "I have feasted. Leave or die," the creature bellowed to me. I looked up at the creature. A tall, skinny gray frame with long arms, and what looked like claws at the points of its 4-fingered hands. I pleaded for Jess's life and offered my own. It laughed an inhuman laugh. "You are not of this land. Leave now or die." The creature turned and began walking away from me. I raised my rifle and pulled the trigger. Click. It was jammed. Mud had jammed the bolt. I quickly released the magazine, pulled the bolt back, then inserted my second magazine and sent the bolt forward. I aimed and fired into the creature's back. The rounds pierced its back, and it screeched in pain, flailing its arms around. I unloaded the full magazine into the abomination until my weapon clicked again, out of rounds. With the rifle being nothing more than dead weight, I unslung it and threw it aside. I pulled Jess away from the creature as it flailed around in a pool of black sludge. I leaned her against a tree. She was unconscious and had a deep wound in her arm, as if she had been slashed with a knife. Blood gushed out of the wound. I recognized it as serious. I immediately used my belt as a tourniquet to cut off the blood circulation and hopefully save her from passing from blood loss. Once I tied the belt and the blood flow significantly slowed, I quickly hoisted her into a fireman's carry and began moving away from the creature. Its screams engulfed the forest and never quieted down, no matter how far we moved. I moved through hours of darkness and silence, moving as fast as I was able. Fatigue began to set in, and hope was depleting until I stumbled across a trail. I could tell it was often used due to the dead foliage and dried boot prints in the mud. I followed it until I found the main road that led up to the forest. I remember falling to the ground before blacking out. I awoke in a panic. 2 figures towered over me. The blood in my eyes made it too hard to see who they were. I tried to sit up, but instead I fell back and passed out. I awoke in a hospital bed with tubes and casts on and in me. Stitches on my arms. Later a doctor explained that I had 4 deep slashes in my back, a broken ankle, cuts on my face, and ligament damage to my arm and shoulder. I had critically elevated blood pressure and had been in and out of consciousness for 2 days, though I could not recall it. I immediately interrogated the doctor about Jess. She was a lot better off than me. She had a deep cut in her arm similar to my back, and some other smaller cuts and bruises. Luckily, the makeshift tourniquet had worked, and even luckier, she would not lose the arm. She recovered a few days before me and was escorted to a police station to give a proper statement. Despite all the pain I had endured, what was truly damaged was my mental state. I couldn't accept what had happened, or even understand the idea of how I survived. Truly, I was desperate for someone to hug me, so I could let it all out. I needed Jess. Instead of having this, thoughts of the creature poisoned my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I would be standing between 2 rows of trees, my feet rooted to the soil, darkness creeping in from all around me. Once I was barely able to see, a piercing screech would hit me. I'd look in front of me and make out the silhouette of the creature, slowly moving between the trees, getting closer each time I slept. I just wanted it to be over. It was like being back in the real situation. It caused my vitals to race, and nurses would often sedate me, causing me to fall asleep only to repeat the process all over again. Eventually, I was deemed no longer a threat to myself, and I was released. A sheriff picked me up and drove me to the station. They took my statement but acted like I was either crazy or suffering from PTSD. They snickered, left me in a room for hours, then returned only to ask the same questions over and over. Once they were tired of hearing the same story, they dropped me off at a small hotel where I spent a few nights. The aftermath was Jess never visiting me, never reaching out, or even responding to my texts or calls. The local police sheriffs interviewed me one last time, and told me it was a bear attack, and that Jess went back to the woods with officers to find her father's body. I don't blame her. It was later reported that she went missing inside the search area. It had been almost 9 weeks since she went missing when I began to lose hope. Now, I don't think she's ever coming back. She was the love of my life, and I couldn't protect her. I thought I'd type this not as a story to be enjoyed but as a warning. There are things in this world that we aren't supposed to know about, and I believe they want to keep it that way. In fact, I know they'll keep it that way, as their hunger knows no end. I'm sorry, Jess. Jack sat at his small kitchen table, the dim light from the bulb above casting long shadows across the room. The bright light from his laptop screen hurt his tired eyes as he scrolled through the endless pages of the essay he was struggling to finish before the deadline. The cursor blinked persistently, a stark reminder of his lack of punctuality. Jack's hand moved through his disheveled hair, suppressing a yawn. Concurrently pursuing 2 master's degrees while managing a demanding workload and maintaining a semblance of personal life had left him feeling frayed and exhausted. The daily routine was taking its toll, and he longed for something to rekindle the enthusiasm he once held for his academic pursuits. Sighing, Jack leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms over his head. He glanced around the cluttered kitchen, littered with coffee mugs and half-eaten meals piled high in the sink. As he refocused on his laptop screen, an unexpected pop-up ad caught his attention. Vibrant images of lush forests and rugged mountains filled the small window, accompanied by bold text. Explore the untouched wilderness of Oregon. Guided hikes through state parks available now. Jack's heart skipped a beat. The thought of escaping his monotonous routine for the serene beauty of Oregon's wilderness seemed too good to be true. He could practically smell the fresh pine air, feel the crunch of leaves under his boots, and hear the calls of wildlife echoing through the trees. It was a chance for him to take the day to slow down, to unwind and enjoy the beauty that is Mother Nature. The following morning, Jack awoke with a renewed sense of determination. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds of his apartment, illuminating the cluttered kitchen, he reflected on the previous night's research. Although guided by enthusiasm rather than comprehensive knowledge, he diligently packed the necessary supplies for his upcoming hiking expedition. A couple of changes of clothes, a flashlight with almost dead batteries, a Swiss Army knife his dad had given him years ago, and a large bag of trail mix he hoped would suffice for sustenance. He threw in a water bottle and a first aid kit he found buried in a drawer, its contents mostly expired. "All right, Max," Jack called out to his little Jack Russell Terrier, who had been watching him with curious eyes from the comfort of his dog bed. "Time for an adventure." Max bounded up eagerly, his tail wagging furiously as Jack attached his leash. "We're going hiking, buddy," Jack said with a grin, scratching behind Max's ears. "You're going to love it." With the backpack slung over one shoulder and Max happily trotting beside him, Jack locked the door to his apartment behind him and headed towards the parking lot where his beat-up old sedan was waiting. Loading his gear into the trunk, Jack couldn't suppress the surge of excitement bubbling inside him. This spontaneous decision felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the suffocating routine he had grown accustomed to. As he drove, Jack couldn't help but feel a mix of nervousness and exhilaration. He glanced over at Max, who was sitting proudly in the passenger seat with his head out the window, tongue lolling happily in the breeze. The road stretched out before them, winding through rolling hills and dense forests. Jack's mind raced with thoughts of the adventure ahead, the mysteries waiting to be uncovered in Oregon's untouched wilderness. Jack and Max arrived at the trailhead just after noon, the sun hanging high in the sky and casting waves of heat down onto the lush green forest below. Jack parked his car in the crowded lot, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. He glanced at Max, who was already eager to explore, bouncing on his paws as Jack opened the car door. "All right, Max, let's go see what we can find," Jack said, grabbing his backpack and making sure Max's leash was secure. The parking lot buzzed with activity, hikers and families preparing for their own adventures, but Jack was focused on the tree line ahead, eager to escape into the solitude of the woods. As they approached the edge of the woodland, a large wooden sign displaying a detailed map of the available trails came into view. The sign used a color-coded system, with each trail designated by a different color. Jack meticulously studied the map, trying to understand the intricacies of the various routes. Although the specific meaning of the colors escaped him, he guessed that they probably indicated varying degrees of difficulty. Jack traced his finger along a black trail, which seemed to loop deep into the forest before circling back. "This one looks interesting," he said to Max, who barked in agreement. Without giving it much more thought, Jack set off down the trail, eager for the adventure. The trail started out wide and well-trodden, winding gently through the trees. The sounds of the parking lot quickly faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. Jack took a deep breath, savoring the fresh pine-scented air. This was exactly what he had been craving, a break from the suffocating routine of his daily life. As they ventured deeper, the trail began to narrow, the terrain becoming more rugged. Rocks and roots jutted out from the ground, making the path uneven and difficult to navigate. Jack stumbled a few times, cursing under his breath, but his determination didn't waver. Max, on the other hand, seemed to thrive in the challenging environment, darting ahead and sniffing at everything with boundless energy. A few hours had passed since Jack and Max had set off on the trail. The once wide and well-trodden path had completely disappeared, swallowed by a tangled mess of roots, rocks, and dense shrubs. Jack's initial enthusiasm had given way to a growing sense of unease. His water bottle was almost empty, and his muscles ached from the relentless hiking. "Come on, Max," Jack muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "We have to find a marker or something. We can't be that far off track." Max, sensing Jack's anxiety, stayed closer than usual, his ears perked and eyes darting around nervously. The forest, which had seemed so inviting and serene earlier, now felt oppressive and alien. The shadows lengthened as the afternoon wore on, and the air grew cooler, bringing with it an eerie silence. Jack pushed forward, his eyes scanning desperately for any sign of the trail. Every direction looked the same, and the forest seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. He stumbled again, this time catching his foot on an exposed root and crashing to the ground. Max barked, rushing over to his side. "Damn it," Jack cursed, pulling himself up and brushing dirt off his clothes. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising panic building in his chest. He tried to remember the map he had seen at the trailhead, but it was a blur in his mind. Jack pressed on, his steps growing slower and more cautious. The underbrush was thick, and he had to push branches aside to forge a path. The deeper they went, the darker and more claustrophobic the forest became. Jack glanced at the sky through the dense canopy, noting the sun's rapid descent. The threat of darkness was closing in, and with it came a growing sense of dread. "Damn it." The voice came, warped and distorted, as if the forest itself was trying to mimic him. Jack's blood ran cold. He stopped dead in his tracks, straining to listen. "Damn it." The voice echoed again, warbled and wrong, sending chills down his spine. Max, sensing the danger, suddenly bolted, disappearing into the thick underbrush with a frightened yelp. "Max! Max, come back!" Jack shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Panic surged through him as he realized he was now completely alone. He stumbled forward, trying to follow the sound of Max's frantic barking, but it quickly faded into the distance. "Max, come back," the voice mocked, closer and more insistent. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he spun around, desperately trying to pinpoint its source. The forest seemed to twist and contort around him, every tree looking the same, every shadow hiding potential threats. "Stay calm," Jack muttered to himself, his voice trembling. "Just stay calm." He took a deep breath and tried to focus. He had to find Max and get out of these woods before nightfall. Jack's flashlight flickered weakly as he trudged forward, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the trees. "Max!" Jack called, his voice swallowed by the forest. The knot of anxiety that had formed in Jack's stomach tightened, as the battery to his flashlight flickered several times before giving out, plunging him into darkness. "Max!" the voice echoed, unnervingly close. Jack's breath hitched. He turned in circles, trying to catch any sign of movement, any hint of where the voice was coming from. The forest was now a maze of shadows, each one hiding potential danger. "Who's there?" Jack shouted, his voice breaking with fear. "What do you want?" Silence. Then a low, guttural laugh echoed through the trees, sending shivers down Jack's spine. He backed away, his eyes wide, straining to see anything in the encroaching darkness. The laughter chased him deeper into the forest. Jack turned and ran, ignoring the branches that whipped at his face and the roots that tried to trip him. He had to find Max. He had to get out of these woods. But as he ran, the forest grew darker, the trail more indistinguishable. Jack's footsteps echoed in the silence, each one a reminder of how alone he was. His heart pounded in his ears, his breath coming in desperate gasps. Suddenly he stumbled into a small clearing, the last light of the setting sun casting a dim glow over the area. Jack collapsed to his knees, panting heavily. He looked around, hoping to see Max, but the clearing was empty. "Max," he whispered, his voice breaking. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the full extent of his situation. Jack glanced at the sky through the dense canopy, noting the sun's rapid descent. The threat of darkness was closing in, and with it came a growing sense of dread. "Jack." The voice came, warped and distorted, as if the forest itself was trying to mimic him. Jack's blood ran cold. He stopped dead in his tracks, straining to listen. "Jack." The voice echoed again, warbled and wrong, sending chills down his spine. Max, sensing the danger, suddenly bolted, disappearing into the thick underbrush with a frightened yelp. "Max! Max, come back!" Jack shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Panic surged through him as he realized he was now completely alone. He stumbled forward, trying to follow the sound of Max's frantic barking, but it quickly faded into the distance. "Max, come back." The voice came again, closer and more insistent. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he spun around, desperately trying to pinpoint its source. The forest seemed to twist and contort around him, every tree looking the same, every shadow hiding potential threats. "Stay calm," Jack muttered to himself, his voice trembling. "Just stay calm." He took a deep breath and tried to focus. He had to find Max and get out of these woods before nightfall. Jack's flashlight flickered weakly as he trudged forward, casting eerie dancing shadows on the trees. "Max," Jack called, his voice swallowed by the forest. The knot of anxiety that had formed in Jack's stomach tightened as the battery to his flashlight flickered several times before giving out, plunging him into darkness. "Jack!" The voice came again, unnervingly close. Jack's breath hitched. He turned in circles, trying to catch any sign of movement, any hint of where the voice was coming from. The forest was now a maze of shadows, each one hiding potential danger. "Who's there?" Jack shouted, his voice breaking with fear. "What do you want?" Silence. Then a low guttural laugh echoed through the trees, sending shivers down Jack's spine. He backed away, his eyes wide, straining to see anything in the encroaching darkness. "Jack." The voice was relentless, beckoning him deeper into the forest. Jack turned and ran, ignoring the branches that whipped at his face and the roots that tried to trip him. He had to find Max. He had to get out of these woods. But as he ran, the forest grew darker, the trail more indistinguishable. Jack's footsteps echoed in the silence, each one a reminder of how alone he was. His heart pounded in his ears, his breath coming in desperate gasps. Suddenly he stumbled into a small clearing, the last light of the setting sun casting a dim glow over the area. Jack collapsed to his knees, panting heavily. He looked around, hoping to see Max, but the clearing was empty. "Max," he whispered, his voice breaking. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the full extent of his situation. He was lost, alone, and being hunted by something that could mimic his own voice. "Jack." The voice came again, softer now, almost a whisper. Jack looked up, his vision blurred with tears, and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was tall and emaciated, its pale flesh almost glowing in the fading light. Hollow black eyes stared back at him, and a twisted smile played on its lips. Jack backed away, his mind racing for a plan, any plan. But the forest had turned into a labyrinth, and every path seemed to lead deeper into darkness. He knew he couldn't outrun the creature, but he had to try. Gathering the last of his strength, Jack turned and bolted into the woods, the creature's laughter echoing behind him. He ran blindly, branches slashing at his face, roots tangling his feet. The forest seemed to close in around him, and Jack knew he was running out of time. Jack stumbled, falling to the ground. He scrambled to his feet, but it was too late. The creature loomed over him, its hollow eyes boring into his soul. Jack's scream echoed through the forest, but there was no one to hear it. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope tonight's stories kept you company in the dark. Sleep well, and if you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe. Good night, and see you in the next one.